Hello and welcome back to Education on Fire. This is our live podcast. This is a very exciting end of a series for us. Ger and I have been talking together since February time, I think, is when the first podcast came out. We were recording before Christmas. And it's just been such a great journey. 10 episodes covering 7 chapters of his book. And also then we did 3 episodes following through from that for early years, schooling, and then the one earlier this week on higher education. So this was an opportunity to bring in some thoughts that we've had over those few weeks, people that have left some messages. If you're here live, thank you so much indeed. Feel free to leave where you're watching, any questions, any comments in the chat, we can bring those in as well. If you're watching on the replay, thank you as well. Feel free to leave some comments in the chat, and we'll get to those, and we'll be able to share those, and we'll get to those afterwards as well. So yeah, thank you very much indeed. But we're going to use the framework of the book. We're going to use some of the chapters that we've done, some of the episodes that we've done to be able to do that. If you haven't listened to some or all of them, then as you're here on YouTube, there's a whole playlist of the entire podcast season, which you can find on the homepage. And also, if you're audio only, do just check out Education on Fire, and you'll be able to find all of those. They're all titled GGGG, Ger Graus Gets Gritty. That was the name of the season, and you can find all of those as one big playlist. But for now, let's bring Ger on to say hello, and then we can take you through our thoughts and what we've managed to cover, we think, over these last few months. Ger, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Mark. Before we kick off, can I just say that my 2 miniature dachshunds, Florence and Connie, are lying asleep next to me, and the danger of a live broadcast is that Amazon hasn't arrived yet. So you may have to fill in while I open the door at some point. Hopefully not, but you never know.
Absolutely fine. That's why we love live. It's why we like being able to interact, and that works both ways. So from our side as well as the people watching as well. So that won't be a problem at all. So why don't we kick off with, what are your thoughts on the process? How has it been for you? Because obviously this sort of followed through from having written the book, something you thought you would never do. So I'm assuming that having a podcast series based on that was something you, even further down the track, you wouldn't have actually thought you were going to do either.
So no, I'm grateful for the process. The process is interesting because I think in general, when we're busy working and doing what we do, and particularly in education and in schooling, we're very busy people, right? And so we actually get very little time to reflect. Even our professional development days are taken over by other people, or Ofsted or DFE or whatever circular or regulation is next. And very, very rarely do we get the time to actually sit and think about Johnny, Mary, whoever it is, and what happens to our young people. So similarly for me, the book was a process of reflection, particularly at the time when I wasn't very well and I was going through my cancer kind of episode. So there was an odd relationship in all that, because actually the book helped me to get through that period of illness. And now the podcast has been a reflection on both, really. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity then to be able to spend some time with my friend Rebecca to talk about the curriculum, etc., and particularly with my friend Christian Fabi to talk about not just Reggio Emilia but also our mutual friend Carlo Rinaldi. That was an honor, right? So I've loved it. It's been good fun in all sorts of ways, really. Yeah. So thanks, Mark.
Absolutely my pleasure. It's been something which has been enlightening for me. It's something which has kind of really been able to sort of focus my thoughts, having done this podcast since 2016. And I've mentioned before, we've got our 500th episode coming up, I think in like a month's time or something. I think as a non-educator, as a music professional, as a music educator, who's someone who sort of come into education from the side, so to speak, rather than being a trained primary teacher or secondary teacher or higher education, I got lots of thoughts, lots of ideas, also as a parent as well. But to be able to have our conversations and to start to be able to formulate and articulate some of the things which really struck me, which I think I've always thought of, but not being able to kind of put it into that perspective in that same way has been it's been a real joy for me, and something which I've then been able to take into the conversations that I've had on various podcasts I've been guests on, or people who've asked me about various things, because being able to sort of use what you've learned and the conversations that we've had and actually be able to frame that in a way which I think is helpful for people has been something which is hopefully going to enable me to be more articulate moving forward.
I think just one observation on this. You see, I think everybody, to a greater or lesser degree, is an educator. Not everybody is a schooler. But I think everybody's an educator, and I think because we confuse the schooler with the educator, we sometimes allow particularly parents to absolve their responsibility as educators. I think we are all responsible contributors to the education processes and lives of our children. We're not necessarily, I'm certainly not, brilliant at being a schooler. When my youngsters used to come home with anything that had any numbers in it, from chemistry to mathematics, I would be the one running down the garden path, to be quite honest. I was kind of all right with history and languages and stuff. But educators, we are all. And that comes with a responsibility and with I think with certain behaviors of decency and kindness, as well as wisdom and experience. So I think you're a brilliant educator, Mark, and I think you're probably a better schooler than I am as well.
Thank you. I think the other takeaway I have is, interestingly, the National Association for Primary Education has just released a book related to John Coe as one of the original founding members. And I had the privilege of working with him sort of 10 years ago when I first started getting involved in the association, and he was still active into his 90s and part of that for a few years. And I got the chance to interview him and have conversations with him. And he was one of the first people I remember talking about the fact that we are all educating our children. They're talking about parents are integral to what goes on, with the child at the center of what we're doing, and how schools should be working with parents and they should be interacting. And we should have this idea that homework, as I think we've spoken about, should be, something we do collaboratively, not about sitting down doing a worksheet, but visiting things, experiencing things. And I think that comes, almost full circle when he was talking about Sir Tim Brighouse, and someone that you've spoken about, and those sort of, you suddenly go, I start to see how this sort of world of people who really understand those things, it's not rocket science. No one's reinventing any kind of wheel. It's we know what children need, and we can see how all that fits together, and how we're all, like you say, we're all an integral part of that.
I know it was Tim's line, wasn't it? That whole thing about we can only personalize education when we know our children well enough, and we know them beyond the grade. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit. And the thing that always stuck with me, that Tim's, unique way of expressing himself was, I once witnessed him at a head teachers conference, primary head teachers conference, and he said to them all, do you remember what flavor crisps your children like? And I think it's just such an interesting question, because it's such an obvious everyday way of stating, well, never mind their attendance percentages or their level, whatever they're at, but actually, who are these young people and what makes them tick, and how can we make them tick more? How can we make them tick differently? How can we make them tick faster or slower, whatever is appropriate? And that's something that I learned from Tim, probably more than anything, was that personalization is not getting children to do the same sum in a different way. It was about much more than that. And you're then back to that difference between education and schooling, I suppose, in that sense. So the late, great Tim Brighouse, forever to be remembered, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And while we're sort of talking about this sort of community aspect, obviously you have people who were involved in the book and supporting the book and testimonials and that kind of thing. So we should just mention some of the people that very kindly recorded some of the stuff for the podcast as well, who are involved in the book too. And that sort of, we've got Mark and John and Richard and Sergey. So just talk a little bit about what they mean to you, how they supported you, and kind of the fact that I know that they've all got their own individual place in your journey from an educator's point of view, but like you say, they all come from the same spot, I think, outwards.
I think it's a very interesting. It's an eclectic bunch, I think would be a way of putting it, and essentially, they are. I had a series, a column in the week Junior, and and where we asked lots of people 5 questions about how, and it was called Becoming Me, and how did you get where you are, rather than what tests did you pass, and and it was a very interesting exercise. And right at the end, we asked everybody from film producers to heart transplant surgeons to window cleaners. We asked everybody to draw a line of their own professional life. And I was one of the people being interviewed as well. And the conclusion at the end of 20 interviews was that there are no straight lines. We of course, in our schooling, all of our lines are straight, aren't they? You do this, and then this happens, and then that happens, and that happens. But there are no straight lines. And so the people I bumped into are evidence of no straight lines. I met Mark Sylvester, the guy who said that I was a black belt in storytelling, or whatever quite the quote was. I met Mark to a mutual friend, and Mark was in charge of TEDx in, I don't know, California or whatever else, wherever it was. And he and I did some bits and pieces together, and we stayed friends. And Mark and I meet once a month, and we chew over the fat. That is Trump, or that is Johnson, or Farage, or whatever. And we talk about some good things as well. And so that's how I met Mark. Sergei Kozaretsky, who was a very senior colleague at the National Research University in Moscow, heard me speak at a conference in London, I think, and kind of contacted me and said, would I like to do some work with his university? This is all prior to the war in Ukraine, incidentally. Carlo Rinaldi, who became my hero and my best friend, I was secondary trained. I am secondary trained. I discovered that wherever there was a problem, that the solution and the roots of the problem lie earlier and earlier, and so you end up in early years. And when I started at Children's University in 2007, I was looking for an educational ideological baseline, I suppose. And I looked at early years, and I literally got hold, through a mutual friend, got hold of Carla's mobile number. And WhatsApp didn't exist in those days, but I texted her and said, can I please come and visit you? And I went through this interview process of meeting this guru, this Wonder Woman. So all these people I've stumbled across them. But I think if I look back, and I think this happens to everybody in some shape or form, what do we have in common? We have in common two things: a like-mindedness and a like-heartedness. And when you start to put those two together, then you end up with a bunch of people that you like and that you then connect with. And I'm very grateful that all those people that you mentioned and many more, I learn from all the time. I quote them all the time. I think back to our conversations all the time, and they haven't just made my professional life, they've just made me better. And we all have people like that. I'm when I talk to my wife, who's a head teacher here in Sheffield, or talk to many other colleagues, everybody goes so and so, so and so. And you have people, you already mentioned Tim, for example. We all have people like that. And thank goodness.
Yeah.
I think what we need, and I go back to the time to do that, we need the time to reflect and think. I genuinely think, thank God I met Tim Brighouse. And thank God I met Carla Rinaldi. And it's all, and some of the things that you learn from people were already there, but you learn to express what you thought through the words of other people, right? The environment is the third teacher, is a Carla Rinaldi, Loris Malaguzzi quote that I would never have come up with. I've known that somewhere all the time, but what they did, what what my friendship with them did was it kind of articulated my thinking mess, and that's really important. And again, we all have people like that.
Yeah, and interesting that that you mentioned that one there. So let me just bring that up into here. And that's exactly that. That someone had actually mentioned there before, the fact that not only is the idea that the environment being the third teacher, but more importantly is the fact that it's the thing that most people miss out on. It's the thing that they don't realise as much. It's the thing that you just think, oh, it's just one of those things. But of course, you only have to have been in a room which has got no windows for a long time, or you never get out of school and then all of a sudden you're on a trip, or whatever those things happen to be, and then you really start to notice, you think, well, that was a whole different day, that was a whole different world. And you can call it a wow day or those sorts of things, but you can create a whole different things and around that. And I think you've mentioned before about this sense of, you get a sense of what the school's like when you go in, when you talk to the children. You know, you can have the professionalized field and all the really shiny things in a reception, but is it child friendly? Is it come from the children, or is it just one of those things that's there to look good rather than be an immersive experience for children?
And it's about, I mean, that whole thing is also about teaching versus almost teaching versus learning, right? That concept is that if you focus on the learning as opposed to the teaching, then you very quickly leave the classroom. Either in your mind or in your heart or in reality. And it's interesting that if I reference the very first Ofsted framework as an inspector, this is going back to 1992. Many of your listeners will not have been born, I think, at that time. But going back to 1992, as an inspector, you had to judge the quality of teaching and the quality of learning as two separate judgments. And you could have a situation where the quality of teaching, the planning, the delivery, whatever else, was quite good, but the quality of learning contextually to some of those children was not very good, because it didn't take them to the places where they would learn best, either in their mind or in their heart or physically outside. And now, of course, online. So there is that kind of fourth dimension in there somewhere. And I think we need to, perhaps when we think like that, I think in general, we need to have our set agenda, yes, but focus more on the how do we get our children to learn this meaningfully, as to how can I tick the box of having taught it. And this, incidentally, let's be really clear, is never about teachers. And actually, it's not about children either. It's about policymakers and list makers who work for boring organizations like the Department for Education and Ofsted, and heaven forbid, the government. Whereas we should leave, I still, it's one of the things in my entire working life of many decades now that I struggle with, is that I went through a cancer operation 12 months ago. At no point would I have wanted somebody in the British Medical Association to hold the knife. Right, but we seem to be completely comfortable by, I want my surgeon, I want my expert, but we're clearly very comfortable to actually turn around and go, well, you know what? In education terms, in schooling terms, we listen to what Ofsted and the DFE tell us, and we tell people how to operate on people. No, thank you very much. Right, so I think we've talked about this such a lot, Mark. This whole concept of the whole professional trust thing. And recognizing massively qualified people. Just give them the license to be beautiful and brilliant, rather than put them in a straitjacket, which is what we're doing. Because the more you put the teachers in a straitjacket, the more you put teachers in a straitjacket, the less you allow them to reach. Yeah, and the less you allow them to reach, the fewer children's hearts and minds they will touch.
Yeah, and I think we talked about, you can't even if you had all of that scope to do what you like, you still can't even do that unless children in a position to be able to learn, whether that's having eaten properly, having, like we talked about, the environment, not knowing the child enough to know maybe what's happened overnight, all of those things. And we did have a comment for someone who said that her son gets 15 minutes to eat lunch, and then they have to eat it in the classroom, which is the same room they've been in all morning. And what can you say about that?
God help the kid, right? I think we're in this thing where I mean, it's some of this is soul destroying. This happens more at secondary than it does at primary, but it is soul destroying, and it is fundamentally wrong, because schooling and education should be about more than passing the test, should be about more than ticking the box, and we are increasingly far away from this, and then we wonder why we have issues that are where our youngsters generally begin to seem to think that schooling is irrelevant to their future. Why do you go to school? Because you make me. But also how that affects youngsters' mental well-being, because when we have a sense of purpose, whatever that sense of purpose is, we have something to strive for, something to aim at, something to work for, to enjoy, to be disappointed in sometimes, right? All those things go hand in glove. But if we don't see why we do things, life becomes a pretty pointless, monotonous 1984. Increasingly, 1984 is the wrong thing. It reminds me of the film The Wall, the Pink Floyd's The Wall, with, I think, Bob Geldof starred in that all those years ago. And I don't think I've left the cinema more depressed, not many times, than after that film. But I think we're not far off that. Yet learning should be a joy. And it should be driven by the curiosity of the children we feed. We'll get them there. We generally have that the wrong way around. But it's not the teacher setting out to be dull. It is the governments and DFEs and Ofsteds and whatever they call of this world who bully us. Because if you don't do those things, we will tell you that you require improvement. Right? Okay, then. And off we march, like in The Wall, the film, right? There we go. We march on. It's not a good place.
No. So if you're watching live, thank you so much for being there. Really appreciate it. If you want to leave a comment, if you want to ask a question about Ger, either related to any of the episodes we've done or just anything that we say now, feel free to do that. Put it in the comments, and we can ask that in real time. We decided in order to give us a focus on what it was, and I think also some sort of positivity as well, that we would use some of the quotes that we've come across from the 7 episodes and sort of work through a few of those, and then Ger can sort of share some of the things that he remembers from that and some of the stories as well. So this is kind of where we were, where we are with it. And so let me just take us through. This was episode 1, the benefit of hindsight and the lessons learned. So, if you're a teacher and just realise that 50 years from now someone will say your name, that's your responsibility. Whether you say good things or bad things, nice things or not so nice things, that's in your gift and that's in your hands. I think that's a really important one, Ger. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think positively, it's singularly the biggest reward that we get. And it was interesting. I was doing some work with a group of head teachers in the south of England, primary head teachers, not that long ago. And I kind of slightly mischievously asked them whether they remembered the name of their dentist when they were at primary school. And very few did. And then I asked them whether they remembered the name of their GP when they were at primary school, and very few did. And I asked them how many had been in the scouts or guides or whatever things were called in those days, and whether they remembered their leaders, and some did and most didn't. Then I asked them for the names of their teachers, and they rolled them off, every single one of them. And I think the thing behind this quote really is about the importance of teachers, and therefore, in very inverted commas, the power of the teaching profession to make huge differences to children's lives. Now, it is up to us as that responsible adult as to whether we're going to have that influence positively or negatively. But my eldest daughter Anna still to this day talks about Mrs. Poole, and Mrs. Poole was her teacher in nursery school. When up to the and I remember I mentioned this in the book. I mean, to the day when Anna started going to that nursery school, everything that involved anything was daddy, 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 daddy this, daddy that, and daddy the other. And then something like the 1st of September of whatever year it was, she went to nursery school, and that very day she came back and went, Mrs. Poole, Mrs. Poole, Mrs. Poole. And I'm going, whoa, what's happened here within a day? And to this day, Anna will talk about how kind and how funny and how clever, 3 words, Mrs. Poole was 26 years ago. So Mrs. Poole is halfway there now. Right? I certainly talk about my teachers more than 50 years ago. And I think that comment I made as a almost we get many awards. We get best school and outstanding and whatever, but we don't get many official rewards. And for me, that thing about kids remembering who we are with a smile on their face and with gratitude is a reward that is probably the highest accolade that we can achieve. The sad thing is that many of us will never know. I've been very lucky, but that many of us will never know that those conversations take place. I've had 2 in a 45-year career. I've had 2 incidences where I've come across youngsters I taught many years ago who went, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. And that was much, 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 much more important than getting a grade 1 for an Ofsted lesson or whatever the hell it was, right?
Absolutely. Now, Peter, thank you so much for asking this. It says, great, Watts. Thank you very much. Any thoughts on how AI is influencing teaching practice, and can it be used to improve teaching and teacher well-being?
So wow, there's a good number of questions in there. How to use it in? Could you put that back up, Mark? Is that possible?
Absolutely.
Question, just for me to. Thanks, mate. Because there we are. So, any thoughts on how AI is influencing teaching practice? I think very ad hoc and very hit and miss. Because I actually think that societally and professionally, we haven't decided yet whether AI is a good thing or not. So I think it very much depends on individuals and individual schools. Can it be used to improve teaching? 1000%. Yeah, it should also improve. I hate this phrase. I can feel it coming on now, like a DFE statement. Reducing the bureaucratic burden, or whatever the wording is, always makes me laugh. I think it can improve teachers' well-being in a number of ways. One is it should, well used, it should save time, or it could save time, right? Well used also, it could bring joy, and it could make teaching and planning and children's learning better. But I think we're still naively at a point where we're going, well, is this thing good or not? And it reminds me, I go back a long time, right? So it reminds me when I was at primary school, I learned to write with a dip pen, right? So if you were left-handed, you were done for, right? Because all you did is you just smudged. But I was right-handed. So I learned with a dip pen, and my writing was really neat. When ballpoint pens, this is in the Netherlands, when ballpoint pens were introduced into the classroom, there was an outcry because we would all become illiterate because we would write too fast and it wouldn't be neat enough. And there were some points to that. We wrote much faster, and I think we weren't quite as tidy, but we produced more. So you weigh up what was more important. When the calculator came along, we were all going to be dumb, right? Mathematically illiterate, as it were, innumerate. And we were never going to be able to go to a shop and get the right change for the £3 we paid or whatever. The fact that somebody would go tap, tap, tap with a card and all that was not even in people's minds. I think AI is similar. And my daughter's second year at university, and she's a language student, and she's writing an essay at the moment. And she's got a 10,000, she rang me last night and she said, I've got a 10,000 word text, which I need to bring down to 5,000. And I'm looking forward to it. Interesting. Well, why? She said, well, one thing I've done is I fed it all into Claude. And I said, so is that going to be your answer? I said, and her reply was, no, but Claude's been helpful. Just like the calculator was helpful and the ballpoint pen was helpful. I think the difference with AI and technology, particularly the internet in general, is it has the potential to set the education world alight in the best possible way. It incidentally also has the potential to enhance the gap between have and have not into can and cannot, to extraordinary differences. I fear that's the way we're going. But to answer that question, I think for me, it's a positive. But we could really do, and I'm not looking for government guidance on this. I'm sure there will be at some point, but I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for a forum of professionals with a positive attitude to go and say, right, in the very first Ofsted framework, when you observed the lesson, you could only grade a lesson a 1, which was the top grade, if there was evidence of awe and wonder in the lesson. I think AI has the potential, with brilliant teachers, to bring awe and wonder back in an awe and wonder kind of way. We need to embrace this, and we're going to get some of it wrong, and we're going to make some of it boring, but we're going to make most of it really good. But I think the issue, also considering the pace of change, is that we need to hang together much better as a teaching profession, almost have a social media thing for teachers, which is not a moan channel, but is one that kind of goes, I've just done this today. Anybody want to have this? How do I solve this? We need that kind of instant reaction and excitement back. And I think AI and technology in general could offer us that. But I don't know whether this is typical of England 2026 or whether it's typical of the profession worldwide. But it's all becoming a bit dreary and a bit negative. And I think we all need a bit of kick of the arse, quite frankly, to kind of go boom again and have fireworks. Peter, brilliant teachers will use AI to shine and sparkle. I think that's the answer. I certainly can think as a language teacher how it would make my lessons better, more meaningful, and more electric, really. And actually, it would help me better to answer the question, why am I learning this subject? Bing, 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 right?
And I think I've interviewed a few people on the podcast, in terms of VR and being able to virtually go to somewhere. I mean, we'd probably all love to go to Egypt and walk around the pyramids, but no one's doing it tomorrow necessarily without a lot of fundraising. And even then the paperwork will be massive. But the ability to have a set of VR and take children to the pyramids is something which is possible. So why would you not do that? And so
there's a sorry to interrupt, Mark, it just sprang to my mind. There's a guy called Anthony Geffen, Geffen, and he heads up a business called Atlantic Productions. I think they're called Atlantic Productions, off the top of my head. And they do much of the special effects, for want of a better way of putting it, for the David Attenborough programs. I saw this. I went to see Anthony a number of years ago, and he and I did some stuff at BET together just before COVID. They'd scanned the entire pyramids. Right. So I went to his office. I stood next to Tutankhamun, right? I'm there. And the problem became not does the technology exist, but the gap became between how do I get it affordably into schools And affordably means sustainably, because these things break and I need to be able to replace them, and I need the latest version. And that was he was up against. The technology they had was, I flew with butterfly when I was in his office. I witnessed a baby's heart transplant when I was in it. I mean, there was magic there that was unbelievable. But this is where schoolingly, DFE, Ofsted is where we're missing the gap. We need huge investment wherever it comes from. You know, the people say, well, our youngsters aren't skilled enough. Well, that's not their fault. Right? My little one is hugely capable. Give her every opportunity and she'll jump at it. So we need to rethink what we mean by schooling and education. And you know, quote Ken Robinson, we need to move out of the era of the first industrial revolution. That's what it is. The excitement of technology is mega.
And obviously one of the big things that came out a lot from our conversation was that children, and as you said at the end of our series, everyone can only aspire to what they know exists. And if you can't do it in person, then virtually, or a way of, it's still an experience, it's still an understanding, it's still an opportunity to share, which I think is brilliant. And so I love that awe and wonder side of things. But I also think from the sort of the technology point of view is the fact that no one ever tells me now, don't look on your phone to work anything out or to get some research. Could you just go to the library? And I know it's closed at the minute, but could you go tomorrow and could you get it back to me? The genie's out of the bottle, so to speak. And I think AI is exactly the same thing. It's here. It's not going anywhere. It's part and parcel of our life. So understanding how to use it, why to use it, how it's framed, how it's put together, and how we teach our young people to use it in a way which is responsible for ourselves and also for them is the key thing. Because, like you say, we're not going back to doing it differently.
Neither is it about replacement. We have this nonsense. Kindle was going to replace the book. The internet was going to replace the library. No. It's about additionality. It's about more. It's about different. So when I talk to my youngest one, who was at uni, and I ring her at, I don't know, 5 o'clock in the afternoon because I miss her. Right? And I ring her up and I'll go, and I want to say, how are you? And I get a text message back saying, I'm in the library researching my essay. It doesn't mean that libraries are dead. It does redefine their function. But it is, so technology is about as well as, sometimes more exciting, sometimes quicker, sometimes more convenient, but not the total replacement. We need to do this with our mindset and stop doing this because it's getting in the way. And I remember once a conversation over a dinner in my children's university days in Cardiff. I sat next to Colin Jackson, the hurdler, a lovely man. And I you know what it's like, you sit next to somebody famous, and apart from can I take a selfie and can I have your autograph, you then kind of go, well, what do I say to these people? So I said to him, can I ask you one question that's always puzzled me? I've watched you so many times at world champion on the telly, of course, world championships and Olympics and whatever else is, 110-meter hurdles or whatever it is. Just before the gun goes off, what are you looking at? And his answer was, stuck with me forever, his answer was the finishing line. Because if I focused on each individual hurdle, I would never get there. I kind of quite like that. And I like that as a metaphor to kind of go and use in schooling terms. And I think we are too hung up on each individual hurdle, and we're not focusing enough on the potential finishing line of each individual youngster.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. And just on sort of combining the idea of the environment and what children do, my youngest is now, she just finished her first year at university, and she was just saying the library in her experience had changed so much from hardly anyone in there earlier in the year to recently when it's all been exam time or whatever, completely full. And I remember when she was doing her A-levels and GCSEs even before that, like I say, they could revise anywhere, but there was something about the learning environment of a library. Whether they ever opened a book in it or not, I've no idea, but they wanted to go and be somewhere and studious collectively in a place they thought was going to be supportive, not in a coffee shop, not at home, not in someone's front room. And they did a little bit of that, but the main thing was, we're going to study together, we're going to go to the library. And like I say, that isn't necessarily what you imagine in the library. I'm going to the library to look at a book or to do some research or whatever, but it's about that bigger picture.
But environments, perhaps historically, I don't know, I guess, but environments have behaviors and attached to them and encourage behaviors. Have you ever noticed that even the loudest people, when they enter, apart from reform voters, but even the loudest people, when they enter a library or not a library, a gallery or a museum, they all of a sudden begin to whisper. And I think libraries have a similar effect. I think they have an effect of focus, of respectful behavior, of more individuality than collectiveness, I guess, because it's about you and that resource. You don't go and have a big debate about it, because you might do that elsewhere. But how brilliant could it be if your phone was on silent and you WhatsApp your mate who's somewhere else in the library saying, I've just found what you're looking for. So the combination of things, it doesn't exclude technology. Being quiet doesn't. I think we need to be more creative in how we think around how our young people at any age, how they learn.
Yeah, I agree. And if you've got any thoughts about any of this, feel free to keep commenting and ask questions. We're not waiting until the end or anything like that. We're happy to go backwards and forwards. And we've got a million things that we talked about in terms of what we were going to actually cover from various things, but we're never going to have time to get through all of it. So what I'm going to do, Ger, is I'm going to sort of give us the opportunity to flip through a few, and anyone you want to sort of stop at or bring on any extra details, then do that. But I'll read them as we go.
Thank you.
So the minute you touch on an abstract in a lesson, the next thing that should happen is comma, for example, the two most important words in that lesson. And I guess that's definitely one you'd like to say something about.
It's very simple. I mean, I'm a great advocate for experiential learning, because I think experiential learning makes learning visible. It turns teaching into a picture, right? So, and this is from personal experience. My maths teacher, if A is 2 and B is 3, what is C? I couldn't care less. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't understand the language. Why would I be interested? If in my day, many years ago, in the early 1970s, my maths teacher talked about Johan Cruyff, total football, and playing in triangles as a for example, I would have sat up and I would have wanted to know. So that kind of concept that for youngsters, when you talk about abstracts, please make the next sentence, for example, and attach a short story to it, and you will bring more of the young people with you.
Amazing. What we have become is accountable to the system and not accountable to the child, which I guess we've kind of talked about around and round quite a few times, but I think we can all sort of understand and identify with that. Children can only aspire to what they know exists, which we've already spoken about already. And then we had a whole episode on exactly that, didn't we?
We did. And it's about purpose. I mean, it's about answering. That whole thing is about being able. It's about two things. It's about doing this instead of doing this. And it's about answering why questions.
This one really struck me when you said about it, first of all. Don't you know that people from Wythenshawe don't fly planes? I think that's worth us just speaking about again, because that really struck me when I first heard that.
It's where the children can only aspire to what they know exists comes from. I was education director in Wythenshawe for the Education Action Zones. and my office was based at Manchester Airport, who were the main sponsor at the time. And Manchester Airport's interest was to create a community workforce. So most of the people at the airport at the time, this is 25 years ago, most of the people working at the airport came from outside the local community, and the airport wanted more people from the local community to be employed. So I kind of went and talked to little ones, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, and kind of said, tell me the jobs you could do at the airport. And the answer was always things they could see. So you can do baggage handler, sell newspapers at W.H. Smith's, you can do passport control, whatever. You can drive the buses. But nobody mentioned traffic control, air traffic control, because you couldn't see it. So they didn't know it was there. So one of the things I used to say to the kids was, bearing in mind Wythenshawe was at the time touted as one of the most disadvantaged areas in the country, not just touted, it was. So I used to say to the youngsters, look, you can fly planes. And when you start to get answers from not just one, but many 7 and 8-year-olds who would say, don't you know that people from Wythenshawe don't fly planes? Then you understand that that whole concept of the fleas in the jar becomes true. That actually no child lacks aspirations. We do that for them brilliantly.
Yeah, I love that, and it really struck me. It's the sort of thing you sort of know, but it's only when you sort of see it in that sort of context and you hear it in that sort of context, you go, well, of course that's the case. But like I say, I think unless you're intentional about what it is you're thinking about, it's really hard to know any different about those things.
I agree.
So we get hung up on schooling more than education. We're quite happy to alienate the parents. We don't actually want much to do with the parents. We've sort of covered that, but I think it's worth just.
But I think it's a true thing, isn't it? Because the bottom line is we have this odd thing that we have a government that decides what children should be taught. We call it the national curriculum. Then the schools become the means of doing this, and the DFE and Ofsted become means of controls. And actually, you could have that whole conversation without mentioning the word child once, and conversations with other people surrounding that child, the parents actually get in the way. And that's more or less the system we're in. And the teaching professions have to be brilliant despite the system, not because of it. And so we actually we talk a lot about parental engagement, but we're actually really, really poor at it. And people can give me all sorts of examples, but actually proper engagement, parents as co-educators, in secondary schools in particular, is pretty non-existent.
Yeah. So we also have, give me a confident learner and I'll bring you the grades. Where did that come from?
So that came from when we had the Children's University, when I set up the Children's University, learning outside the classroom, age 5 to 14, with a passport. You collect credits in libraries, museums, galleries, zoos, farms, sports clubs, whatever was verified as good learning. We got Cambridge University to do an evaluation, and their conclusion was that there were about 10 conclusions, but the main conclusions were that children who participated in the Children's University perform better at school. So the reply from the then Department for Education and Skills, I think it was, the reply was, so you teach maths booster classes? And we do no such thing. But what actually the evaluation of Cambridge University told us was that the more children, the poorer the background, incidentally, the more children participated voluntarily in learning outside the classroom, the more confident they became. What was already known worldwide by studies was that confident learners attain better grades. So that became the link. The other finding then was, of the two findings, was that not just if children participated voluntarily in out-of-school hours learning, they did better, but the more they participated, the better they did. So actually that the education and schooling of children is not a straight line. If you are underconfident, you will never, ever, in a French lesson, German lesson, Spanish lesson, have the bottle right from the beginning to go, I'm prepared to make a fool of myself in public by getting it wrong, right? So it's as simple as that, isn't it? So the more exposure we give to learning opportunities, the more confident these young people become. The more confident they become, the better it gets.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we got into episode 3, this, and we talked a lot about this, the difference between schooling and education. But the better schooled you are, the better educated you can be if you wish to be.
Yeah. I mean, there's always an element of choice, isn't there? But the bottom line is that the difference between schooling and education is schooling is a set period of time, 5 to 18, 5 to 16, whatever country you're in. Education is 0 to 99. The better schooled you are, the better able you will be to self-educate yourself for the rest of your life. If you choose to do that, there's always an element of choice. And that's it really. So the relationship between schooling and education is that schooling is a servant to education.
Yeah, no, I can completely see that. And like I say, that element of you having to then take the next step and take something from it to take it forward is such a key part of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this one I find really important. We don't talk about well-being. We talk about not well-being, and the entire conversation is never about, oh my God, I feel so great. This is a big one for me, and I often talk about the sense that so much of what seems to be well-being in our school system currently is almost putting a sticky plaster over someone who's actually sort of been beaten around the knees, as it were, because it's doing it because the system itself, the way we expect people to survive, let alone thrive in school, is to put them in an environment which isn't very supportive, and then all those other things are to try and help the fact that we know that's not the case. And I guess that's really where we're going with this.
I think it's an important one. In Dubai, some years ago, under the guidance of Dr. Al-Karam, at KHDA in Dubai, they introduced the happiness agenda in Dubai, and people thought it was a gimmick, but I didn't think it was a gimmick at all. What it was a deliberate attempt to address the well-being agenda positively. What makes you tick better, as opposed to what makes you feel not good. And I think very often we are in the what makes you feel not good, and I think you're right. We over the years have had that thing about, now I've identified what's the matter with you, I can give you the red, blue, or yellow sticker, and that's it. And there's a very sad, but also very funny story told by the comedian John Bishop, the Liverpool guy. And I met John once or twice. And the story he tells about, I didn't realize this, but John is severely dyslexic. And he lived in Runcorn, a kind of Liverpool overspill area in those days, not far from the Welsh border. And he talks about being dyslexic as a boy and being particularly upset how his parents didn't know what to do. My parents wanted to help. He says, my dad wanted to help me, but didn't know how to help me, which must be one of the worst things ever. So then in the inimitable John Bishop way, he then says, one Saturday morning, my dad put me in the car and drove me to the Welsh border and stopped by a village sign, got out of the car and said, there you are, son, you're not on your own, right? And so that's the funny John Bishop with it. But the idea that having stuck the label on you absolves us from the responsibility to then properly fund it, properly do something with it, is probably not ever so far off the mark, you know.
Yeah, I think that's really true. So we've got about 5 minutes left or so. So if you do have any thoughts, anything, if you're watching, any more comments, please put those in. We'd like to bring those up as well, and that'll be really, really, really supportive and helpful for you. Hopefully, that's kind of what we're here for, you to be able to share some of those things. This I always think is important. If you're going to study Shakespeare with children and young people, they should either get the chance to see the play or be in it.
Yeah, I don't know why you would do it otherwise. I just can't understand why. This is a bit like the thing we talked about earlier, Mark, the for example bit, right? So So we've read the play, comma, for example, we're going to go and either play it or see it, or both, preferably.
I mean, it is a bit of a no-brainer, you would think, but it obviously, like I say,
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
necessarily feature. Brilliant. Let me take it. So the technology thing we've sort of spoken about a lot.
Yeah.
Let's not get into them banning mobile school phones in schools just a minute, because as I said, we've got 5 minutes, not 5 hours. But
Yeah.
amazing. So this I thought was a really interesting one around that technology element, in terms of, give me a group of 20 youngsters and they will write a code of conduct that is better than anything adults can write, and they're probably also better at policing it. I think that was a really important thing to mention. So just tell me about that for the moment.
Well, there's a classic example. So Australia, with the best of intentions. I mean, these things are always with the best of intentions. There might be from a naive starting point, but they're always with the best of intentions. So Australia banned the use of social media for under 16-year-olds. 2/3 of them are still using social media because presumably they've discovered VPNs or God knows what, right? So now, if you've taken a really good representative sample of the youngsters themselves and had engaged them in the process of what to do, what not to do, how to avoid X, and how to make Y happen, I think that success rate, if that's the right word, would have been greater, right? So we come up with these things. I mean, we've seen it with the online laws, children's laws, through both the Children's Commissioner and the Information Commissioner's office. All these attempts, but they have excluded the young people themselves. So give me the 20 kids and they will come up with their code. And of course, they'll need some guiding. And when they need help, they'll ask for it. And they will be better able to police them. But to go back to Carla Rinaldi, is we need to trust our children as much as they trust us. And I think we are, by and large, not very adequate in that.
Yeah, I agree. I have one final thing which I think I'd like just to mention as we sort of wrap up, and that's the sense of, on our final episode, I think in episode 7, in terms of relating to the book, it was that kind of, where does that bring us to when we're sort of looking back, when we're thinking about these things? Is it, are we stuck? We can have these conversations. How does it affect our classrooms? How does it affect what we're doing? And I think part of that for me was the sense of, you can only do what you can do. We should have these conversations. We should actually be, holding people to account in all of that. But there's a personal thing here, like you said, when you remember back to your teachers, what is it that you remember and why? And it's usually about how you made them feel and all of that sort of thing. So just the last thing I'd just like to mention here is that certain dials are too big to shift by one person or by one small organisation. It's a concerted effort, and in order to see the big picture, all of the pieces of the jigsaw need to fall into place. And I think we've spoken about government, we've spoken about parents, we've spoken about school leaders, we've spoken about teachers, we've spoken about that whole kind of community effort. Where do you kind of feel, if we were going to sort of round up all the sort of parts of the conversation we've done, where we are now and how we can finish on that sort of positive outlook, rather than just being, I guess, too dismissive of the fact that, as I think you mentioned, we're not that far away from where we were in sort of 1944 when all of this sort of started to come into force?
I think we need to first and foremost, we need to remind ourselves of our common purpose, our common mission, right? One of the first questions I always used to ask of teachers or anybody in interview was, do you like children? Right? On one or two occasions, people would say, I'm not sure. And my reply would be, I've got no idea what you're doing here then. Right? So our common purpose is very simply about, we like making a difference to the lives of children. If you don't like making a difference to the lives of children, please leave. Go and find something else to do, because it can't be good for you. It's certainly not good for the kids. Just go away. Right? And good luck, by the way. Right? And thanks for everything that you've done so far, but please go away. So we need to remind ourselves of the common purpose. And once we agree that the common purpose is really simple, it's not to be geography more important than history. It is about to make a difference to the lives of children and bring them joy in learning. And that kind of quote that is about, you know, once the light's turned on, it can't go dark again. Yeah. Then the next bit becomes about, well, how do we collectively do this? And I think we need using platforms like yours, right? Mark, sorry. Using platforms like yours, I think we need a velvet revolution. I think we need a common debate, not black or white, but a lot of it gray, as to how we can move this forward. I think we need to take our parents with us. And if that is, and this, I'm not talking about a unionized approach now. I'm talking about the movement for betterment of everything we do, everything we stand for, and everything for the children. And if that means eventually calling a national strike against this ludicrous government that we've got at the moment and that we've had for God knows how many years, with their teaching and testing and Ofsted and no context and DFE offices full of people who've never been on a council estate, then it's time that we kick that into touch and that we go, for the greater good, with parental support, we're going to down our tools until you give in and you are with us to make this better. I think a velvet revolution is never a violent one. It is neither is it an ultra confrontational one. But I think we need, you know, I was asked the question, and this was perhaps a good one to finish on. I was asked the question in an interview fairly recently, do you think, with a magazine in Japan, do you think that teachers, in terms of importance, societal importance, are on a par with doctors and lawyers and architects? And my answer was, no way. Teachers are much more important than doctors and lawyers and architects, because without teachers, there wouldn't be any doctors and lawyers and architects. And I think that's the bit, without arrogance, but that's the bit we need back. You know, Meneer Beurskens, Van der Goor, Heine, people like Richard Taylor and Paul Nevins, my colleagues, I used to stand outside their classroom and listen to them teach, and literally used to stand there as a newly qualified teacher and think, my God, I wish I could do this. I have a sack full of teachers' names who I wish I could have been like. That's what we need. We need to get excitement back about what we're doing. And if that means saying no to some of that nonsense that's coming out of Whitehall, then let's say no. Let's have that velvet revolution. I think that's what Ken Robinson was saying. I think that's what Tim Brighouse was saying in their own way. It was certainly what Carla Rinaldi is saying. And I think it's what I'm saying and what many other people are. But we just need to, I don't know, we need Ted Raggs, we need Tim Brighouses, we need Mark Taylors, we need people to come forward. We need Warwick Mansells and wonderful people who write so eloquently and so well. We need them to become more important. Because as long as we deal with children, we peddle hope. Our main job is to do that.
Yeah. Well, Ger, thank you so much for these days, weeks, months. It's, as I said at the beginning, the end of our series. It feels like the beginning of our journey is probably the best way to put it. So thank you so much indeed. I can't wait to chat again. Make sure, if you haven't got the book, that you actually definitely do go and check that out. So if you go to Ger's website, then that gives you all the details, and wherever you find books, you will find it there, but through a different lens. Lessons from a Life in Education is not just worth the read, it's worth the hope, the understanding, and the willingness to make a difference and understand what that difference is. So Ger, thank you so much indeed.
Mark, thanks for the company, and thanks for having me on. Cheers.
So thank you so much to Ger. I can't tell you how extraordinary it's been to spend time with him, and actually, as I said, be able to articulate some of the things which I've learned from him over these last few weeks. If you want to keep up to date with more of these things, if you want to have an ongoing conversation, make sure that you're here on YouTube. So please do subscribe. Please do also make sure you get that notification bell hit so that you know when we're going live, you know when the latest videos are coming back and all of those things. So thank you so much again, and I really appreciate you being here, and look forward to these continuation of great conversations, which is so important for ourselves, our children, and I think the future for the world at large. And I think it is that big a deal. So yeah, thank you so much indeed. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.